Morning, team, and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is Ukraine War news update for the 29th of June 2023. And goodness me, there is a lot of news to get through, so I better get on with it. Go to our usual opening gambit, which is Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply. I find these indicatively useful. What trends they tell us? Well, let's have a look. 680 liquidated personnel. That is fairly high. Lower than it has been. Yesterday there were high troop losses but low equipment losses. Today there are higher equipment losses, marginally were a little bit lower troop losses. 2 tanks, 10 APVs. There are some saying that there just aren't the tanks left in the Russian defences to hit. That could explain why there have been fewer tanks for the last few days. We have seen consistently decent numbers of tanks taken out as far as the Ukrainians are concerned over the last month or so. So, yeah, that could be the case. Now, we had a record low artillery systems for the last couple of months yesterday. Now we're back up to 27 taken out. That is a huge blow for the Russians. They must be really low on tubed artillery at the moment, given that they've lost so much. Yes, they supposedly have huge stocks of these, but when I say low, I mean in the right places at the right time. When you hit these artillery systems and pieces, they don't just have a spare one sat behind it. They need to get that from somewhere. Is that taken from an existing position elsewhere on the front line? From the reserves, if they are sat in reserves, why they're not being used, so on and so forth. All these questions come to the fore. One anti-aircraft warfare system, depends what that is. It could be, I have a feeling an S-300 system was targeted last night in Tokmak. That is the kind of rumor. I don't know what that system might be. One aircraft here, and that seems to be a jet, a fixed-wing airplane taken out with an Igla. It did return to the base thoroughly damaged, as far as I can work out. 14 drones, 6 vehicles and fuel tanks, 6 pieces of special equipment. That's fairly high. Could well be things like excavators, or it could be ISR, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, or electronic warfare equipment. It's kind of a wide category remit there. Okay, that is to say that the Russians had another day of taking significant losses in different categories along the front line. Now, here's a footage of the Igla. That's 9K38 Igla man-portable surface-to-air missile system taking a Su-25 attack aircraft conducting operations in the Bakhmut front line. Indeed, so this one says it's unknown if the aircraft ended up crashing or was unable to able to return to base. Well, actually, here, while it's still unknown whether the Igla was able to successfully hit the aircraft, this would not be the first time that Su-25 was able to survive a direct hit and return to base. So we have seen previously planes hit, but that could be the plane that was being referred to in that category. I don't know. If we have a look here, I'm going to turn the music off. Let's see if, and yeah, there's the plane there. And there definitely was a hit. There's an explosion on the plane. So the plane was hit. Just what happened to it afterwards, I don't know. It sort of lose the video feed from there. Okay, what other bits and pieces in the hits and losses? This is interesting. I didn't know where to include this. Interior Ministry General Alexander Travnikov was involved in a serious all-terrain vehicle accident. He's in hospital in critical condition. One asks oneself whether that was indeed an accident. It's kind of equivalent to defenestration and falling out of a window. Talking about the craft, the IL-22 that was taken down with 10 airmen in it. It was Wagner what did it, right? During the mutiny the other day, I showed you that some of those were really high-ranking airmen. Well, they have a combined flight time of 17,600 hours, which is phenomenal. So when you talk about the expertise in losing crewmen, there is nothing more indicative of that than your flight hours here. That will be a huge loss to the Russians, no doubt. Right, moving on to strikes. Tokmak has been hit. 6 explosions were heard in the city of Tokmak. That sounds like a pod of HIMARS. There's also been a rumor that early this morning in Tokmak, locals reported an explosion close to a site where Russian forces used to deploy S-300 air defense installations. Thus far, we have no visualization of any damage. So it could be, as well as the six, I think this is a separate hit on Tokmak. It could be an S-300 being taken out. Might not be, don't know. The air defense systems in this area, that is, these destruction of enemy air defense missions are going to be incredibly important going forward. There is something to say about the air situation around Bakhmut, but we come on to that. And remember, that jet was taken out around Bakhmut as well. A strike on a Russian base of personnel somewhere in Donetsk, right? This is supposedly glide bombs doing this. So these are JDAMs, possibly one of the first really clear examples of JDAMs being used. Really significant damage being done to this base, apparently. And in short, the boys are still lying under the rubble, says this person. This is a Russian recording this, saying it's effed up. This is what happens when you have arrivals and all stuff like that. So that is a significant hit. And indeed, some of the other footage on that, double strike. You can see some the damage being done by these. I won't show it past here because you do see some. Oh my word! Damn it! Didn't remember. It scared me. Whew. Significant explosions there. That looks like something like JDAM for sure. So yeah, good to see them being used from a Ukrainian point of view. These are really, really decent bombs. They can be pretty sizable in their explosions, and they are fairly accurate as well, given that they have their GPS and guidance on board. Adapted dumb bombs as they are. So they have not been used as extensively as people were imagining, partly because the supposition is they are easy to jam, or the Russians have been able to jam them successfully so far. But yeah, good to see that. Something is burning in the area of Nizhny Novgorod. It's an oil and fat processing plant that is on fire. Significant explosions of fire taking place there. That is not good for the Russians, obvs. And then we go on to mention Kramatorsk again. The guy that apparently directed the Russian fire into that target has been arrested by the SBU. Why are you targeting a pizzeria? The Russian propagandists and Russian MD, they've come out and said, right, this is a successful hit. Basically, the understanding, as far as I can work out, is this was a restaurant that Ukrainian military personnel often used. So it's a legitimate target. It's like, so I was listening to Ukraine Latest podcast yesterday, and there was a journalist who was sat in that restaurant 10 minutes before the missile hit, and I think he took a phone call or something. One of those moments where you're like, goodness me, serendipitous that was. But he then moved off, and he said that excuse that the Russians give is not good enough. He said every restaurant in Kramatorsk is used by military personnel. They are around there, being that there are bases around there, etc., and it's a kind of staging post. But that's a pizzeria. Twin 14-year-old girls and a 17-year-old girl were killed. I think the number of dead is now is higher than it was yesterday. They are still finding dead bodies, and they just found another one. It's a war crime, right, as far as I'm concerned. So the excuses the Russians give are not good enough. End of. I did like it when Dom Nichols on the Ukraine Latest podcast for the Telegraph named those two twin girls and said, this is their names. You say them out aloud now yourself. Let this hit home. This is what has happened, and that was really evocative. Okay, moving on to other sort of military matters. There's been another US leak, purposeful leak. The main targets for capture were, unsurprisingly, Shoigu and Gerasimov. So this is Prigozhin's mutiny, he planned to capture Russia's military leadership as part of the mutiny, but had to rush the operation after Russian intelligence FSB learned of the plot some 48 hours in advance, which could explain part explain its failure. I think this is a useful bit of data, and I think it does do a good job of explaining. So, I believe Gerasimov was it Gerasimov? Not sure. Gerasimov was in Rostov on Don when they uh, when they hit Rostov on Don and they took over military base and the southern or the air base and then the southern district command headquarters. Now, apparently he was there and then sort of did a quick skedaddle and got out of there. And it was someone else, somewhere else in Rostov, I think, when Wagner were there, kind of looking for him. So I believe that actually they planned to get him in Rostov and then planned to kidnap Shoigu. When they realized that failed and they were accidentally a lot closer to Moscow than maybe they were expecting to be at that time, they realized they had to sort of cut a deal and things weren't going to plan. So possibly that makes sense of the data. Prigozhin planned to capture Defense Minister Shoigu and Chief of Staff Gerasimov, says the Wall Street Journal. So they're talking to this as well. Plot had a good chance of success before it was leaked, which forced Prigozhin to launch his attack 2 days early, according to Western officials. So he had to rush it by actually doing it 2 days before he had originally planned, and it all went wrong from there. Now, General Surovikin, I talked about this yesterday, saying it was rumored he's been arrested. It's still rumored. He's still missing. I don't think he's in. There's several places that he claimed he might be, but now that's been denied as far as a detention center and some other, I think, judicial establishment. But he's certainly missing, and the rumors are that he has been arrested. Sources close to the defense ministry confirmed to the Moscow Times, suggesting links to Wagner boss Yevgeny Prigozhin and knowing of Wagner's attempted coup. Well, actually, so Chris Owicki's done a bit of a thread saying that although his whereabouts are unknown, it's reportedly not true that he's in a prison or pre-trial detention, Lefortovo prison. However, it won't be helped by the claim that he's an honorary Wagner member. So he goes on to talk about how in 2017 he was given a personal, Wagner PMC badge under the number M3744, according to the Dossier Center. Surovikin became a Wagnerite. So that is. And the Dossier Center says it'll expose the names of other honorary Wagnerites, which could cause a right. So this is Mikhail Khodorkovsky's Dossier Center. These are Russians leaking other Russians associations with Wagner, which could cause a right hoo-ha in the Kremlin. Right, now going from Russia to the US via Russia. Good old Biden, Joe Biden, getting some unwelcome attention here by some women of a certain age. Quote, "We know that this could not have happened." So this is the Prigozhin mutiny. "Could not have happened without the hand of Biden, the West, and NATO. Prigozhin was recruited by Biden, of course he was, and Putin saved everyone. Putin's troops are delighted with how Putin messed up the situation." So these women are parroting something they've been told, or something they've been picked up, that they've picked up from the sort of Russian narratives being communicated on state TV, etc., etc. Biden, as if Biden's recruiting Prigozhin. I mean, seriously, come on. Right, this was something I was going to say. Look, here is a really big difference between Zelensky and Putin. And I've said stuff like this before, but this is a sign of someone who's in touch with the people, who will engender unity and camaraderie in a way that Putin can never dream of. So Senior Sergeant Valery Marcus from the 47th Brigade, known for his updates from the front, met with Zelensky. So he's a guy, I've shown you a video of this guy before. It's very important to get first-hand information about the morale and fighting spirit of the military. This is what Zelensky said. especially considering that the always brave fighters of Magura are now taking an active part in the actions on the front. And here we have just something like that sort of selfie, that just doing that symbol with the hand is youthful, and it gives a certain vibe that you would never see from Putin. Was certainly what I was going to say, and it's still kind of the case. However, this came out last night, right? So Putin is in Dagestan, which is a little bit of a dodgy place down as far as they're not like crazy pro Kremlin, but they do seem to be here. I don't know whether this is a handpicked crowd or whatever. Now look at where Putin is. Now, remember, Putin has traditionally been a germaphobe. He's been incredibly afraid of COVID. That he sits at a very long table with people having to have like a 2 week heads up to meet. He's kissing someone's head there. He is giving someone a kiss on the cheeks. He's getting very close. He has a selfie with someone. It's absolutely incredible. He's then like, so a bit later, let's have a look here. Um, we have an image of a selfie where he's really, really close to the person there. That's that same guy he just kissed, so on and so forth. There's all this talk about, is this the same Putin? There are lots of people saying that is not the behaviour of Putin, who's holed himself up in the Kremlin and not sort of doesn't get close to anyone. And as he gets back into his car, like blowing them kisses and stuff like that. It's just stuff that Putin's never really been seen to do. And then yeah, here's Max 23 saying two Putins, the difference is 10 hours, one in Moscow and the other in Dagestan. And you say, well, okay, that face is definitely thinner. There is potentially quite a difference in that Putin, between that Putin and the Putin in Moscow. Yeah, are these two Putins? And then Evil Gherkin here, the former leader of militias in the Donbass and present military, ultra-nationalist military blogger, has said, while the face vaguely similar to the president and absolutely not requiring compliance with the 2 week quarantine necessary to get an appointment with the president, walked around Derbent, hero of Russia Yevgeny Prigozhin traveled around Moscow and then around St. Petersburg, where apparently he is now. So he banged on about Prigozhin, but this is Igor Gherkin basically admitting that there is a Putin double, which I find fascinating. You know, I've been wondering about this. Is it just conspiracy theory nonsense? But you're thinking the behaviors, there are slight differences in appearances, and the behaviors are really very, very different. And I think that is significant. Right, let's get on to the front line. There's an awful lot to say about the front line, so I'm going to whiz through it fairly quickly. Armed forces near Bakhmut have seized the initiative, are conducting a broad front offensive. So that is quite an admission from the General Staff. They've made gains in Donetsk, Zaporizhia. As part of the counteroffensive efforts, Ukraine's military have advanced 1,300 meters toward Russian-occupied Berdyansk in the Zaporizhia Oblast. It's difficult to know exactly where that is. That's Hanamalia. And 1,200 to 1,500 meters in Klishchivka and Kurdyivka directions in south to the south of Bakhmut. So they are making gains in many of the places. Bakhmut is fully controlled by the armed forces from the air. The occupiers are retreating from the northern streets, Commander Denis Yaroslavsky said. Defenders of Ukraine actually are working to take control of Klishchivka and Berkivka and its strategic heights near the city, and their capture, Bakhmut, can be taken into an operational encirclement after their capture. I don't know how accurate the claim that Bakhmut is fully controlled from the air. The Ukrainians generally don't have air advantage due to the air-to-air missiles on board the VKS airframes, the Russian Air Force. So it is difficult to get an air advantage anywhere. But that is significant. I don't know whether that is because of the threats from the ground, where they've got proliferation of man-pads, these man-portable air defense systems that they can fire off. And we've seen an Igla take out a Su-25 in the area. So, that's quite a bold claim. In response to the confirmed advance by Malia, a Ukrainian soldier going by the name Bakhmut Demon adds that they are already practically in Klishchivka. Russian channels describe fighting there as very heavy. So significant there. Part of the Russian airborne forces, a VDV company near Klishchivka, surrendered half an hour ago. This was reported by, I believe, reporting from Ukraine. There are still some who have communication issues and don't know about it, so they will soon be informed and told to surrender or die, to Ukrainian soldiers on the ground report. So there was this claim that a number of Russian soldiers were captured all in one. Paratroopers are supposedly the elite troops. There have been some sort of pincer movements in the forest areas to the north of Klishchivka. That could be where that is. An update from the Russian blogger Semyon Pegov. That's War Gonzo. Don't know if he's alive or not. He might well be. There might be two bearded ginger people who look identical and not very good at handling arms on the Russian front reporting on the war. I don't know. The airview has expanded the grey zone around Robotina. Ukrainian units have entrenched in new positions near Priyutne, so that's in the Velika Novosilka salient. I'll go through all of this on the Frontline update later. An RU counterattack, Russian counterattack near Rivnopil failed, so that's again in the Velika Novosilka salient. They lost Rivnopil, they tried to take it back, that's failed. And the Ukrainians have advanced near Zalizhnyansky, so that's north of Bakhmut, along the highway, the main supply route that comes out of Bakhmut in the north. So they're having successes in the south and in the north. Then here is Ukrainians have managed to clear one of the minefields at the entrance of Robotina. I don't know whether, I mean, that to me talks of like underselling it, just one minefield. Well, kind of whoop-de-doo. They've got an awful lot of minefields to clear. But I guess the case is that's at the entrance to Robotina. So in other words, that settlement is arguably being attacked today. And that means they will have traversed the trench line there. I don't know whether that white line on that map is a trench line, but I would have thought it's a little bit further north of the town or the village. But yeah, we'll see. And then here's that chap that met Zelensky. So to the fronts, no maps today, but updates from various sources about what's happening. Starting in the 47th Mechanized Brigade, working near Robotina. It is reported that they have made a deep advance in the area. So those are that's coming from sources on the front line. And then we hop to the Antonivsky Bridge, where it all seems to be continuing to happen there. Lots of claims, rebar claiming the Ukrainians continue to hold positions. The Russians use heavy MLRS strikes. They don't help. The Ukrainians are managing to bring in reinforcements. Ukrainians were spotted on the Dnipro Islands south of Kherson. So it's not just at the Antonivsky Bridge area. Russia it has no confident control over this area. So that's coming from Rebar, the pro-Russian source. And then there's loads of other updates. There are a few interesting points from this P-Star 1 update that talks about things we already know. The grey zone extending into the Dachi area up to the entrance of Oleshki. But also yesterday, the Russians published, this would have been the day before actually, what they believe is the Ukrainian battle plan for the whole area. Accordingly, let's have a look at that. The two arrows downstream indicate possible diversion attempts by Ukraine, including Antonivsky Bridge, and the main strike would come upstream of Novokakhovka. So actually, where the dam is, so these two are kind of feints, if you like, and the main attack comes up here, or maybe these two are feints, and possibly at Lvova. I don't know if that's for the one down here or this one. It's probably that one there. The Russians expect the crossing anytime after June the 30th, and crossing would be done by Ukraine's 93rd Brigade. They expect also diverting maneuver in the area of the Kimburn Spit and the Karkinitska Gulf. So this area there. So this is coming from the Russians, and that operational security isn't relevant here. The Russians have said this. At the moment, Russians report a larger Ukrainian military grouping is forming near Kherson with foreign soldiers, so the International Legion perhaps. Now, I can tell you that this is what Russians report is not utter fantasy, and it is based on actual facts, but I won't disclose the details. So he's doing a bit of OPSEC, but basically saying, well, actually, the Russians seem to be right there. And Russians admit they are powerless around the Antonovsky Bridge. and there's some details going into that. So we'll go through that a little bit more later. And then he does another update here. The enemy tried to undermine part of the bridge controlled by us with the help of kamikaze boats filled with explosives. So the enemy being the Ukrainians here, in order to cut the only artery for the transfer of our assault and evacuation groups to the battlefield on the shore surrounded by marshland. Um, yeah, so yeah, a lot of action around that Antonivsky Bridge area. Anyway, moving on to military aid. This is a significant finding, Ipsos Mori polling data, to suggest that support for the delivery of weapons to Ukraine in the US has sharply increased. So, among Americans, support for providing weapons to Ukraine has increased sharply from 46% in May to 65% now, Reuters writes. 81% of Democrats, 56% of Republicans, and 57% of independents support the transfer of military aid. The breakup of the different political parties there, I think, is fascinating. And I would imagine that if you'd done this poll, well, this kind of polling back in the Iraqi war sort of days would have shown a flip of those kind of numbers. So it's interesting how Republicans, I know a lot of Republicans on my threads would not fit into the general trend. So don't start having to go at me like, but this is what the data is suggesting. But I would say that amongst the general population of Republicans, there's been the switch from being more kind of pro-war foreign policy in the 90s, early 2000s, and as we get to 2023, yeah, not so much. If it, and it could be just because it's a Democrat controlled it's the government, the president is Democrat, so on and so forth. It could be that, or it could be just a general cultural shift in what drives Democrat and Republican voters. I don't know, but it's certainly interesting, but good that there is an increase in support for weapon supplies to Ukraine. So that's excellent. The possibility of sending long-range ATACMS missiles to Ukraine is high, says U.S. Senator James Risch. ATACMS missiles are an effective weapon that Ukraine must receive ASAP, Risch said in an interview with the Voice of America. There's been quite a bit of talk about this recently, about how actually there could be this growing, I don't know, not only support from politicians, but a growing chance of them being sent. Concerning the US still, Israel cannot allow the US to hand over Iron Dome air defense system to Ukraine because it fears that it could fall into the hands of Iran via Russia. And that's what the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu has said. So I think they have components of the Iron Dome, maybe some of the defensive components. I think I know that Israel has been sharing some stuff, just not 100% sure exactly what. Lithuania will transfer 10 additional M113 armored personnel carriers and ammunition to Ukraine. That was announced today by the Minister of Defense of Lithuania. Indeed, no, we'll come on to that a little later. So this is Thomas Tyner having a little bit of a rant, actually. He's had a couple of rants in the last few days. He is not a fan of people who are saying that it's going to be difficult for the Ukrainians. It's difficult for them to overcome the defenses. He's saying absolute rubbish. They'll overcome that, and then the Russians will crumble. He's also not a big fan of people saying it'll be too difficult for the Ukrainians to attack across the emptied reservoir at Zaporizhia. He's saying the number and the depth of cracks are a sign of how dry the ground is, and more and deeper the cracks, the drier the ground. Ukraine has received BV-206S amphibious vehicles which have smaller ground pressure than an adult male. People commenting on my earlier tweet knew neither. So he's basically saying that the Ukrainians should be able to attack across the reservoir using the correct vehicles. I think also using kind of low flying helicopters and whatnot as well. So it is, as far as he's concerned, certainly an option. Ukraine and Poland, and I talked about this a little bit more depth yesterday in my extra video. Ukraine and Poland are negotiating over the purchase of a Polish coastal defense system equipped with naval strike missiles capable of hitting naval and land targets. The NSM has a range of that's less than 250 kilometers, isn't it? And is one of the most advanced anti-ship missiles in the world. So around about 250 kilometers. It won't quite reach Sevastopol, which is about 300 kilometers away from the mainland to the west of the Crimean Peninsula. But from Kherson, I think it's actually a little bit closer, maybe 270 around there kilometers. So you could conceivably get a strike. Some people have been asking, and rightly so, why Storm Shadow hadn't been used against ships moored in the port of Sevastopol. And I don't know. I wonder whether they just have a lot better air defense systems there ready to take out those missiles, and they're thinking we've got a better chance of hitting something else, or whether they're not allowed to be used on naval targets maybe there's some agreement with the UK MOD. I don't know, I doubt it, but it could be. You can use these to hit targets but don't sink ships. I don't know why you'd say that, but I don't know. Right, this has got a lot of pro-Ukrainians riled, a lot of Ukrainians riled. I've seen a lot of backlash against Switzerland. So Switzerland, and we've had this talk a number of times, have blocked now the re-export of 96 Leopard tanks to Ukraine. So these are tanks that, well, the transfer of 96 Leopard 1 tanks to be modernized in Germany and delivered to Ukraine has been blocked by Switzerland over the country's neutrality policy, according to a communique seen by European Pravda. The tanks were initially built in Switzerland, but the country's law does not currently allow the delivery of Swiss weapons to combat zones, even when supplied by an intermediary country. And actually, it was a Swiss company that wanted to do this as well, as far as I understand it, RUAG. Uh, this kind of ruling and regulation doesn't make it easy for Swiss defense the Swiss defending industry to compete internationally. And I think it's just a shot in the foot. Not so much. I mean, yes, for the Ukrainian war effort. Yes, it's a shot in the foot for the Ukrainian war effort, but it's a shot in their own foot for the success of their economic success of one of of an important industry, right, for them. I don't know how big a part of the GDP their defense industry is, but I can guarantee it ain't going to get any bigger. Right, moving on to geopolitical stuff. Security guarantees for Ukraine will be formalized as bilateral agreements with France, Germany, Great Britain, and US on long term financing, military supplies, training of soldiers, and the transfer of intelligence. So, this is again the idea that many countries are starting to put into place long term agreements to support Ukraine. Again, this is about saying to Putin, well, it's about giving Ukraine stability, predictability going forward. There's, if you're putting these things into place over a longer period, then you can rely on that income, you can rely on that support, and you can do much more robust long-term planning, strategic planning. But this also sends a really big message to Putin, who's relying on the West and allies to give up their support for Ukraine going forward after some amount of time, because I don't know, we'll get bored or whatever. This is saying to that, no, that ain't going to happen. Tim White here reporting that Poland's president, Andrzej Duda, arrived in Kyiv yesterday. I think that was just a bit of a last minute one. I think it was unannounced. It was, or at least, previously announced. Lithuania's president also visited Kyiv yesterday that was an unannounced visit. I'm pretty sure Duda was as well, though, but I don't know. Maybe not. He will meet with Zelensky, or he met with Zelensky to take part in the celebration of Ukraine's Constitution Day. And that's probably why you saw a couple of little dribs and drabs of military support coming out from Lithuania as well. Croatia today has become the 13th European nation to declare Moscow's deliberate starvation of the people of Ukraine as genocide. That's a Holodomor genocide. Go and look it up. I've said a few pieces on that in previous videos. And then Russia should be designated the state sponsor of terror. Lots of people have been slagging off Igor Sushko, but this is a salient point. Putin admitted today that the Russian government gave Wagner $1 billion in just 1 year. He was trying to take credit for the flawless military coup operations executed by Prigozhin against him. But the ramifications of saying that is that if Wagner have been labeled as terrorists, as many nations have, I think the US has, then if Putin and the Kremlin are giving Wagner $1 billion, that literally is a definition of state-sponsored terrorism. Here's a terrorist group. Here's a state. The state is sponsoring it $1 billion. That is state-sponsored terrorism. And what's going to happen? So that's a good point. Right, I've written an article. I wrote an article yesterday. The rise of the religious far right in Greece. There have been general elections in Greece. This is pertinent to Ukraine and Russia completely. What's been quite surprising, well, not necessarily surprising actually, if you look at the economic situation of Greece, if you look at how they're kind of one of the gateways to Europe, refugees and asylum seekers and all that is kind of fertile ground for this kind of ideology. But they are already ruled by a centre right government. The left were had a record low turnout, and there was a rise of the far right. And there are three particular parties that took 13% of the vote that uh, transfers to translates, sorry, to 34, I think, MPs out of 300 seats in the parliament. Now, these three parties are seriously pretty far right, as in one of them is a reiteration of, a manifestation of the previous Golden Dawn Party that was kind of made illegal, and the leader and six other MPs were put in prison. They had neo-Nazi violence and hit squads. I don't even remember the Golden Dawn situation. They then in prison. One of them started up a new party called Hellenes that was then outlawed, I think, 2 months ago. And then a new party has come along and kind of taken over from where they left off. So anyway, they're the Spartans. So we've got three parties: the Spartans, Greek Solution, and Nikki. Right, let's just look quickly at these three parties, and this is pertinent to Ukraine. So, as I wrote, the Spartans' mission statement declares its desire to preserve, quote, the same people, the same language, the same religion, the same kind, and the desire, quote, to take back the homeland that belongs to us. So really kind of fascistic language there. They gained the support of 240,000 Greeks at the ballot box. Nikki's political positioning is no better, I'd say. So this is a second political party. Their party platform dedicates a section to demographics, to which it decries the, quote, uprooting of the native population of our country and its violent replacement by the completely foreign, in terms of culture, origin, religion, language, population. It also directly cites the Kalergi Plan, a conspiracy theory popular in far-right circles that claims the EU is trying to exterminate the white population of Europe through mass immigration. The party is also close to many figures in the Greek Orthodox Church, right? And then we have Greek Solution. And Greek Solution calls for forming an alliance with Russia, building lengths of electrified border fences, and clamours for traditional values. But where the other two parties are comfortable sitting on the far right, Greek Solution is not a fan of such labelling, saying in a press release, "We are patriots, we are Greek, we are proud of it. Therefore, those who persist in slandering the Greek Solution with false and slanderous characterizations will be held criminally and civilly accountable." However, they appear to be far right. Anyway, the three parties have successfully coalesced around the same ideology. Quote from a different news source: the Spartans, Greek Solution, and Nikki are united around a set of principles largely stressing hostility to mass immigration, closeness to the Greek Orthodox Church, concern over demographics, skepticism toward NATO and the EU, hostility toward Turkey, North Macedonia, and a strong Greek identity. So basically, yeah, you've got all the things like anti-abortion, religiosity, all this kind of stuff wrapped up in that. But what's pertinent to these videos, particularly my Ukraine war ones, are that they are pro-Russian, wanting to do a deal with Russia, one of those parties, anti-NATO, anti-EU, and that's 13% support in Greece. So you have yet another country that is an interesting mix of people. I mean, there are elements of Greece that are very similar to elements of Hungary, elements of Serbia. Um, it's it's an interesting time in Europe, in the world, where in many places we are getting this resurgence of the right, but not just the right, the far right, in a way that I, as a liberal lefty, find deeply disturbing. I'd like to know what you think, particularly if you're Greek. Let me know where you sit, and if you are pro-Ukraine, whether you think this is a challenge to that in Greece. Now, Greece hasn't actually done an awful lot, I don't think, to support Ukraine. possibly because of their government in place at the moment, possibly because that government is pandering to those kind of voters, or has been pandering to those voters on the far right, so they don't go and vote for other parties, but they have done. I don't know where that leaves Greece now going forward, but certainly interesting. Now, something else that I think is worthy of note, partly because I'm obsessed with renewables and I think they're awesome. I've always liked that kind of self-sufficiency element of renewables. But anyway, China is on course to hit wind and solar power targets 5 years ahead of time, like significant amounts, right? So China, this is obviously going to be important in terms of hydrocarbons in Russia. So China is showing up its position as a world leader in renewable power and potentially outpacing its own ambitious energy targets, a report has found. China is set to double its capacity and produce 1,200 gigawatts of energy through wind and solar power by 2025, reaching its 2030 goal 5 years ahead of time. It says that of the first quarter of the year, China's utility scale solar capacity has reached 228 gigawatts, more than that of the rest of the world combined. It's just insane. Absolutely insane. The installations are concentrated in certain provinces. Um, in addition, the group identified solar farms under construction that could add another 379 gigawatts in prospective capacity, triple that of the US and nearly double that of Europe. It's just incredible. Now, why this is important is because, on the one hand, they're taking in cheap hydrocarbons from Russia, but on the other hand, they are hedging their bets in a sensible way, which is like, okay, what's the future of the world looking like? What's the future of power generation looking like? We need to get on board with this. So on the one hand, we're going to take that cheap, but that may not be a long term demand for Russia's hydrocarbons if we can ramp up self sufficiency. So what China would want to do going forward is to be energy independent. But as soon as you have dependence on another country, you are beholden to another country, and that is a security issue. It's an economic issue. So yeah, they might be aligned to Russia, but if that goes south, and it might do, you're thinking about what's going to happen with the end of the war, what will happen with Russia, where are we going to be in 5 years' time, 10 years' time, in terms of our relationship with Russia. So therefore, we need to, wean ourselves off Russian oil and gas dependence, get energy from our own sources somehow, and that's going to be in renewables. I don't know what they're doing with nuclear, and then we are in a safer, better place. But also, I doubt they're thinking too much of the climate there, but it's going to be more about, I think, other benefits for them. Anyway, I just thought that was interesting to note. That is the end of today's news piece. I hope that was of interest to you, informative. Please like, subscribe, and share. I really appreciate all of your support. I get amazed that actually I can speak coherently for 42 minutes. I hope it's coherent without taking a break. But there you go. Maybe my brain is still working okay. Take care. Speak to you soon.